again for the opportunity to be able to put this together, and we are anticipating all the results and all the impacts that will come out of this. So thank you again for this opportunity. And then I want to thank all the facilitators as well. Abdurrauf, thank you very much for being here today. I'm sure that at the end of this session, all the participants will have a lot of things to take away from this. So thank you very much, Abdurrauf. To the students, everyone, if you can hear me clearly, just put the chat in the chat box and just say good afternoon. And you can also indicate what part of Nigeria, what institution you're joining from, right? So just put it in the chat box. I see there are a couple of more people that are still joining the class. So just say good afternoon and indicate what institution you're joining from, just to have a sense of who are in the room right now. Okay. I hope yesterday's session was a good one. It will be important for us to also hear your feedback. I'm expecting comments in the chat box, so please, yes, please put it. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you as you do that. Thank you. Okay, so by way of feedback, from yesterday's session, how did it go? I know you had a session on financial modeling, you had a session on business analysis, so just put in the chat box what your comments are about yesterday. Remember, we made it clear yesterday that as much as possible, this session should be very, very practical, and we do encourage you very strongly to ask questions and have an open mind. Remember, we said that at the beginning yesterday, and also the facilitator on financial modeling also reiterated that. So please make sure you take full advantage of this session. And I also want to encourage you, the research participants, start to contextualize what you are learning from this session into your preparation for the research challenge. I think that's the best way you can maximize this opportunity. So at the end of each class, go back, look at the task you have ahead of you, and start to apply it. And, you know, throw up questions, reach out to us, come back the next day, throw out your questions, so that we can help you get the best out of this session. One of the things we also intend to do is to start to share feedback form so that we can get real-time feedback from you with respect to all the various sessions. And then on a final note, before Abdul Rauf will start, I want to beg you and I want to implore you, please get your writing materials and take down as much notes as possible. You know, the faculty that have been lined up for this program, you cannot get it better. And I'm sure that even after today's session, you will testify to what I'm saying. So I will implore you, get very good writing materials, take as much notes as you can, and note down all your questions. Reach out, ask questions if you are not clear, and make sure you have very minimal distractions so that you can get the best from this session. I want to encourage you as well, make sure you are in a place where your network is strong so that you are not in and out. These sessions are not sessions that you should miss a minute. Okay, so I just want to implore you and I want to encourage you to take full advantage and get the best out of this session. So again, welcome to today's session and thank you for joining. I'll pass it on back to Samson to introduce the class.
Thank you, Ibi. Good afternoon, everyone, once again. So we are just really going to step up before then we'll introduce Abdurrauf. Abdurrauf currently work with FMVQ in a strategic capacity. He's, of course, a CFA chartered holder. Previously, I have experience from investment research and strategy. I would allow Abdurrauf, you know, to do a proper introduction if you wish so. But I wish you all a wonderful session. As AB has advised, please take some time to take good notes, ask questions that you think will be really super useful. I understand that a lot of you have started putting together some of your research already. Just to note that Raouf is both an expert when it comes to industry analysis, and he's also an expert when it comes to macroeconomic issues. So you want to leverage his experience the fullest. So if you have any question, really, it will be good time for you to really just put in the comments or the chat box. We would take those comments intermittently as Abdurrauf takes the session. Abdurrauf, good afternoon and thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, Samson, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here. So, just to be sure, can everyone hear me very audibly?
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay, so as Samson initially mentioned, I work as an economic intelligence officer actually at FMDQ. But before FMDQ, I worked as an investment management professional at WSDC Financial Services. So at WSDC, what I did there was to um, macro research, equity research, fixed income research for client trading purposes and proprietary trading purposes. On the side, I manage a private fund where we invest in local stocks and foreign stocks. So essentially, this session or this conversation we're about to have is something that I do almost on a daily basis. And I used to do them, but I still do them in private capacity. Okay, so as much as possible, I like this class to be very interactive. I try as much as possible to discuss granularly. So break those concepts down to the barest minimum so that you can comprehend them well, so that you can contextualize them and you can relate with them. However, you would also agree with me with that the extent of how far we go or the depth at which we go would also be a function of your participation levels. So there are some questions, there are some things I wouldn't think of unless a question direct me to those things. So feel free ask your questions. Don't be worried or don't be scared whether the question is deemed relevant or not. Okay, just feel free. I mean, the organizers have created a platform for us to have this conversation. So that's what we're about to do. We're about to have fun. We're about to have a very good time. Okay, so I'll just go right into it. Industrial analysis, and I try to segment the areas of conversation. So I'll be starting with the introduction, then I'll speak to approaches to identifying similar companies, then constructing a peer group, a framework for industrial analysis, then the strategic aspect of it, as well as a little bit on company analysis, because there's no way you can do company analysis without understanding the context of which the company is operating. So you look at the industry first before you look at the company. And there's this common saying among the finance folks out there that you cannot outgrow your industry no matter what. Okay. Yeah. So essentially, why industrial analysis? What's the relevance of industrial analysis? And it's simple. Okay, it's simple. What you want to do by evaluating a company's industry is to identify its growth opportunities. What opportunities are available for this company? To what extent can this company grow, or can the companies in an industry grow? If the industry is not performing well, and there's a particular company that is outperforming its industry, at some point, the weak industry growth will rub off on that company. Okay, so and the essence of investing or valuing companies, so to speak, is to say, okay, what extent of cash flows are you going to generate? And if you're going to generate cash flow, it is based on the level of sales that you make. And the level of sales that you make is a function of the fundamentals of that industry. How relevant is it? How important is it? Okay. So you also want to understand the competitive dynamics and what's the context around this. Sometimes an industry can be very, very strong. The fundamentals are great, but not everybody in that industry would benefit from that prosperity. Some would benefit than the other. And a way to estimate or a way to evaluate that is to also see the competitive dynamics as well as the business risk. And this is the place where issues around technology, advancement, regulations, and all can play a very, very big role, right? Now, after you conduct your industry analysis, some of the things that you may want to take away from this is how to choose a peer group of companies. And this is extremely important for you when you do comparables, when you do valuation, and you try to identify comparable peers. Is sometimes it's not exactly straightforward, and we'll talk more on this in subsequent slides, right? So you want to analyze key factors to consider, and then competitive advantage. Some industry, all fingers are not created equal, right? Some industries are greater than the other. Some fundamentals favor one industry than the other, right? And which tells or which speaks to the importance of understanding them. The telecoms industry, for instance, in Nigeria today, account for between 15 to 70%. It changes over time to Nigerian GDP. So if you look at the Nigerian GDP, is broken down into three core areas. You have agric, you have industry, and you have services. Agric is about 20-25%. Services is about 50%, right? So, and then, okay, 50% for services, then the other 50 is shared between industry and agric. So essentially, when you look at the Nigerian economy, it's all about services. Now, when you put your touch into the services, then you begin to think through industries like sectors like trade. You look at financial services, then telecoms. Okay. Now, if you begin to look at those sectors and their contribution to the economy, then you would understand that economic activity. So when you hear GDP, essentially, it's about business activities, about, and I like to break it down to say, when you hear GDP, think about it as number of companies, number of businesses in that particular sector or particular industry. If you have a particular sector that contributes significantly to your economy, then you know that this is it really strategic. So it tells you that a lot of investment is going into that particular area. It tells you that there are a lot of businesses in that area. It tells you that there's a lot of job creation happening in that area. Okay, so that's just a way to look at it, and they are not the same. So you look at services, and then you look at a sector like um I'm trying to think of maybe um, food manufacturing, for instance, which in theory may seem big, but if you look at the difference or if you try to compare the contribution of those two sectors to the overall economy, you would understand why companies like MTN, Airtel tend to report superior financial figures, financial performance relative to the likes of Cadbury, relative to the likes of um, Nigerian breweries and the likes. Okay, so that essentially gives you a sort of guide. It also tells you why, and if you try to bring it to yourself, if you try to personalize this to your individual lives, I mean, many of us are in school, many of us would graduate in a few years to come, and many of us will start thinking through getting jobs and seeking other employment opportunities. And in the course of doing your planning, you do realize that some industries pay well than the others, or some industries provide enhanced career growth than others, right? So, that's also another way to look at it. So it's until you do the analysis that you're able to speak to the sustainability of a certain growth. And the last one, what are the factors that influence individual companies, right? So basically that's just it. Now, how do you identify similar companies? We do them using two approaches, right? Through product or services, companies that produce or that manufacture similar product or that provide similar services. And you can as well look at it through business cycle sensitivities. And at the end of the day, a single framework or a single line you can work with to identify is look at the principal business activities, principal revenue source. So I have two companies. Let me say flour mills and a UACN. Flour mills is considered a manufacturing company, a player in the FMCG space. UACN too is a conglomerate, so to speak, a group of companies that is invested across different subsidiaries. So UACN has an agroallied business where they manufacture animal feeds, and they have a painting subsidiary where they manufacture paint. They have a consumer goods business, a company that operates in the consumer goods sector. That is UAC Foods. UAC Food is the manufacturer of Gala. It is the manufacturer of Swan's bottled water. It is also the manufacturer of Supreme ice cream that you see in ShopRite and other retail stores. They also have, I think that's all. Okay, so they also have a quick service restaurant business, Mr. Biggs. So Mr. Biggs is under USN as well. So you have about four different businesses under one group. So if you look at Flour Mills too, Flour Mills is operational in the foods business. So in the food business is the one responsible for the production of flour, golden penny flour that you see out there, golden penny Indomie, golden penny Semovita, okay, and golden penny spaghetti. That's under the food business. They also have an amazing food cereals. That's a new product that they launched about a year or 2 years ago. So they have an agroallied business too, as well, where they manufacture animal feeds too. You know, these feeds that the market, they tell you it helps your catfish, your fish, and all these things to grow very well. So they have that business. They also have a sugar business, Golden Penny Sugar. You see them in cubes. They've quite replaced St. Louis over the past few years now. So they sell in parts and they also sell in bulk. They sell in an industrial scale. Now you look at UACN, you look at Flour Mills, and you try to say, okay, both are consumer goods business because they deal with consumers. But if you look at the breakdown of their revenue, for UACN, the agroallied business account for maybe 60% of its revenue, but it is not the major driver of its profit. So if you look at Flour Mills, for instance, the agroallied business account for maybe 30-40% of its revenues, then other segments account for the rest. Looking at its contribution to profits too, you know, about 20-25 thereabout. I'm not exactly sure of that figure. But the point I'm trying to make is if you want to make a comparison between the two, there is a distortion. Okay, it is not exactly clear. So you may be very, very careful with comparing a UACN to a Flour Mills. Even though UACN has 60% agroallied, Flour Mills has 30-40% agroallied. Even though there's some form of disparity there, you may, based on this theoretical leaning that you've learned, you may be forced to say, okay, these two are comparables. Exactly not. Okay, because 40-60 is not exactly the same. And when you also look at contribution to profit as well, because that is the earnings, you know, you may not exactly get that unless you don't have any other comparable to use. That's why you can begin to say, okay, maybe I can use USC and there's a form of similarity. I may want to compare. So I may want to compare Flour Mills to a business like, say, an Olam's, a Dangote Sugar, for instance. Dangote Sugar is 100% sugar, okay, and Flour Mills, a significant portion too comes from sugar. Or I want to look for a business where the contribution of agroallied or other supporting business like Bua Foods, for instance. Bua Foods is a very, very good comparable peer to use. So it's not about picking companies and then extrapolating their figures. No, you need to look into those companies. You need to break down their revenue sources. You need to be able to say what portion of this comes from this, what kind of similarity. And you may not get perfect result. You may still have to use some form of subjectivity in the course of the analysis, but at least you have a framework to say there must be some sort of closeness to the drivers of revenue for the comparable companies that I want to use, right? So work with this last line. The company's principal business activities where you derive majority of your revenue and or earnings. See, that's a very strong one. You check revenue first and earnings. There must be consistency along that line. If there's no consistency, then you must be able to pick one of the two, and you use your subjective intuition to arrive at what you want to read or to conclude on what you want to use. Okay. I don't know how this works, Samson. Is it that people can ask questions after this session, or you can ask a question within the section? I'm fine with any. I'm just trying to ask it, to know the modality.
Hi, Abdul. They can ask their questions in the chat box during the class.
Oh, okay. So I can't see the chat box. I can also see my screen. So perhaps someone could help me with, those questions as they drop.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
doing.
All right. So yeah, that's that about that. The last line is the box here. So about product or business cycles, we talk extensively about it in subsequent slides. Okay. All right. So I like to make an important distinction here, right? So um, sector versus industry, and I thought to mention this because it's quite important. So the term sector is often used to describe a group of related industries. So you can have a sector and you can have multiple industries under one sector. And I try to use that healthcare sector as an example. So healthcare sector. So when you look at the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, um, you have about 46 listed sectors. So 46 sectors in Nigeria. Yeah, I did mention agri, industry, services, right? Those are sectors, but you still have subsectors around them. So when you break those three core sectors, you have, other subsectors. In totality, you have 46 of them, and you can have different industry under one sector. So the healthcare sector, whatever it is, you have the pharmaceuticals, you have the biotechnology, you have the medical advice, you have the medical supply, and you have the managed care industry. So these are, and the interesting thing is that healthcare sector is healthcare sector, but the fundamentals of pharmaceuticals may be different from the fundamentals of biotechnology. The fundamentals of biotechnology too could be different from that of medical advice. Okay, it could also be different from that of medical supply. So pharmaceuticals may be a big deal in Nigeria because apparently you have 200 million people in Nigeria. Health is an essential part of, is a need of man. Okay, so the demand may be relatively great. But if you look at pharmaceuticals and you begin to think of medical advice industry, I mean, and this is my opinion anyways, I mean, many may agree with me that, or some may agree with me that medical advice, there's no data to prove this, so we may not be able to say it authoritatively. But my own sense is that given weak literacy levels, given weak disposable income and other priorities that household may typically have in Nigeria, so people would not really take the medical advice industry may not gain that traction in terms of volume to compared to pharmaceuticals. Biotechnology, I don't think Nigeria is there yet in that regard as well. So it's important to look into those industries too, even though healthcare sector is considered, a major one. Healthcare may be major, but not all industries, are the same in terms of fundamentals. So you can have that. So you can have something like manufacturing sector. Under manufacturing sector, you have cement manufacturing, you have food and beverage manufacturing, you have chemicals manufacturing, and a host of others. The reality in the cement manufacturing is not the reality in the food and beverage manufacturing. So it's important to understand that, okay? Because you still begin to think about what kind of market structure, what kind of growth potentials or growth opportunities are available in those space. But I just thought to break this down to understand and how to process the industry analysis. So you have the sector and then you have industries. Sector is often used to describe the collective industries, and they sort of have similarities and maybe some complementary demand, right? Or complementary relationship, but they are sometimes or often driven by different fundamentals. So what are the approaches or sector descriptions, right? So I try to give some examples here. So under materials, you have building materials, you have chemical, paper, forest, you have packaging, metal, minerals. So they can be described under that material sector. You have consumer discretionary. So these, when you hear consumer discretionary, from the word discretionary, what it tells is that these are goods that I can do without. I have discretion over it. I can choose to go with it or not. And these are these are companies that operate under consumer discretionary consumer related product, and they exhibit a relatively high degree of economic sensitivity. What this means, or what that Oyinbo means, is that if the economic if the economy is strong, if it is booming, if there is a strong aggregate demand, if everybody is happy, or if business activities are thriving, the demand for the services or for the product under this sector, under these industries, tend to boom well. Okay, so let me just chip this in. In my presentation, I may be using sector industry interchangeably, right? But please note the distinction that was made, okay? So people tend to use them interchangeably, but it's important for you to know the theoretical differences, right? So back to my illustration. So hotel business and restaurant business, if the economy is not doing well, it's often very difficult for those businesses to do well. And a case in point is, although this is an extreme example, but when there was COVID, when there was the coronavirus pandemic, you saw what happened to those. You saw the industries that were most hit. Okay, while the restaurant businesses were closing down, while they couldn't operate optimally, you saw food businesses doing extremely well. Okay, people stayed at home, people had to eat. So food businesses are considered under consumer staples, okay, because you can't really do without them. So people stayed at home to eat. You needed light to do your stuff. People worked from home, and there was need for them to replicate a similar level of productivity levels. You know, when you had to work from home, you need to generate your power and all. So utility was a big deal. Whether or not economy is fine, consumer staple business typically do well. But consumer discretionary, it is when you have money that you can decide to make, you know, a purchase or to demand for those products. But if the economy is not doing well, the consumer discretionary folks are those that you typically sacrifice first. Eh? So it is then you remember that, well, car is a liability, okay? Is then you remember that, well, this Ashwebi is too costly, okay? All right, so and they are typically costly in nature. Televisions, okay, well, I'll make do with my laptop, okay, I'll make do with my mobile devices, okay, televisions, laptops, and shoes, all those sort of items that you can do without. They are considered consumer discretionaries. And I already touched on consumer staples. They exhibit less economic sensitivity, to yeah, relative to other companies, food, beverages, personal care products. You cream your body whether you like it or not, and maybe some may not cream more. You need to look good, you need to appear well. So energy, these are companies that are in the line of production, extraction, refining of natural resources. And then you have financial services. So financial services sector, and I like to harp on this a lot, right? Because we are in financial services anyway. Financial services is broad, okay, and even from the career point of view. So you have the consumer, you have the commercial banking space, you have the investment banking space, you have the stockbroking space, you have the insurance space, you have the pension space, you have the asset management space. These are industries. Okay, you have the private equity space, you have the venture capital. Let me say private equity slash venture capital space. Okay, all of these are under financial services. They have relationship. They are even driven by they are driven by a common variable or common variables, right? But still under financial services, the activities in commercial banking in terms of scale of scale of businesses or scale of transaction is different from that of insurance, is different from that of pensions, is different from that of asset management too. Okay. Some of the ways to evaluate this is, try to pull in the industry numbers. What's the industry growth rate like? What is the industry return on equity like, to see which is doing more than the others and what is driving that improvement or growth. Okay, so yeah, you can just look at financial services and say, okay, I want to play in the financial services space. If I want to play in the financial services space, okay, and because of a general assumption that, okay, you have transactions must go on, is related to money, is related to transaction flows, deal flows. The next question is, okay, where among the industries, do you want to play? Do you want to go into commercial banking? Do you want to go into insurance? Do you want to play in asset management? And somebody could decide that, okay, commercial banking, and you begin to delve deeper to say, okay, what are the fundamentals? Who are the players? What is the market? What is the growth like? It may be a booming industry, but it may not be an industry that will grow so much over the next years, depending on whatever factors. And you may begin to say, even though it is likely to grow, who are the major players here? What are the competitive forces like? What are the competitive dynamics like? Okay, what is the industry concentration like? What is the barrier to entry like? Okay, it is when you make that decision that you now say, okay, maybe commercial banking may not be a good place for me to make money or for me to establish my foothold. Maybe I want to do insurance. Maybe insurance penetration is low. Maybe the existing players are not doing things the way they should. Maybe you have something else to add to that industry. Or maybe right now the growth is not really great, but given certain dynamics, given certain changes that you see, it could be a policy, it could be a regulation, it could even be something as simple as when you look at the age demography of Nigeria, our median age is 18, but for illustration purposes, let us say that it used to be 32. And then you're seeing the trend that, okay, this 32 is looking like it's going to be 18 or 17. Very great. It means that you have many young people in the economy. It means that expectedly these people would have jobs, would get jobs, they will earn income, and they still have a lot of time to work before they reach their end. So when you look at life expectancy from 17 to 52, you have about some number of years that these guys can work for. And then you begin to think about the level of growth that the insurance industry could achieve based on these things that you have identified. They are all assumptions, by the way. Okay, so it's important to note these sector descriptions. So so you could check the rest: healthcare, industrial, real estate, infotech, and communication services and telecoms. Right now, cyclical industries and non-cyclical industries. Okay, I already touched on it in previous conversations to say cyclical companies typically experience wider than average fluctuations in demand. Okay, as I said earlier, when economy is not doing well, these companies tend not to do well. And you can also overlap this concept of cyclical and non-cyclical with that of sectors. Some sectors are cyclical in nature, right? Consumer discretionary is cyclical in nature. Okay, non-cyclical industries are industries that are independent of business cycle. You might have heard of growth and value. Growth companies, value companies, right? So growth companies are often, not in all cases, please, but growth companies are often considered as cyclical companies. They grow really fast when the economy is doing well. Okay, all these tech startups, not tech startups, all startups generally that are just growing significantly, right? That is achieve massive growth at their early stages. They are often, more often than not, they are often in the cyclical industry space. And then you have the non-cyclical, they call them defensive. So sometimes you can hear growth stocks, defensive stocks. The idea of growth stock or defensive stock is in the sense that when economy is not doing well, these defensive stocks, would withstand the pressure. It doesn't mean they won't decline too. Some may decline as well, but they won't decline as much as the overall economy. So if everybody is going down by 50% or 30%, the defensive stock can go down by just 4%. Okay, and that is an overperformance, an outperformance. If everybody is going down by 50 and you're going down by 4, then you've really, really done relatively well. Relatively well. The relative time is compared to, something else that you're benchmarking it to, right? And these are healthcare, utilities, food and beverages, and the likes. So I don't know, for some of you that follows stock market news and all, in 2020, 2021, 2022, when there was liquidity in the financial system, what does liquidity in the financial system mean? It means when there is a lot of funds, a lot of money into the system. And what happened to that? In 2020, when there was a pandemic, what it meant, what that pandemic implied for an economy was that businesses couldn't operate. And don't forget, I told you in the course of my illustration previously that when you hear GDP, when you hear economy, think it about businesses. Okay, anytime you read newspapers or you hear it in the news about GDP and you want to understand what it means for you and I, what it means for you and I is when you hear that GDP is growing, it means that existing businesses have expanded capacity or they are doing more, which means that there is an increase in demand that has facilitated or that has meant increased supply to meet that demand. If you have an increased supply to meet that demand. If you all remember, when we were in high school, we did economics, we did factors of production. And what are the 4 factors of production? You have land, you have labor, you have capital, and entrepreneur, if I remember correctly. Now, let me hold every other variable constant and let me work with land. No, let me work with labor and capital. So before I produce something, you need labor, you need to employ people, and you need capital, human capital or intellectual capital or financial capital. But let me work with financial capital. You need money. You need people to put money into your ideas, and you need people to implement those ideas. Okay, labor capital. And for some of you that studied economics, you remember that in your production function called Douglas, you hear something around production function is a function of labor and capital. That, and then one variable A, which is technology. I mean, you guys that studied economics will recall. So let me work with labor and capital, for instance. If you need to increase your supply, that means you need more laborers. You need more workers. Think about a chicken republic that needs to increase its outlet from 1 outlet to 2 outlets. That additional outlet will require store managers, it will require inventory managers, it will require accountants, it will require more food attendants. And when you begin to employ those people, one food attendant can now afford to buy an iPhone because it's now earning money, or she is now earning money. She can afford to buy a Shrebi now. Before, Mr. Biggs was a luxury, but now she could afford to do Mr. Biggs, or she could afford to do something else. For these people that she will be buying from, it is a potential increase in demand for each of them as well. Those ones too would need to meet that demand with an increased supply. You know, a family man that used to take his kids to a public school will now afford a private school. For that private school is an increase in demand. They need to buy one more school board, or they may need to increase their size, their class size, because many more people are coming. And that's how it spreads. That's what you call multiplier effect. So what I'm saying essentially is about how to look through GDP, you know, see that. So when GDP declines, it means that people are scaling down production. It means that there is no demand. And if there is no demand, you need to bring down your supply as well. And if you bring down your supply, that's when you begin to hear, you know what, I like you, everything is hard, everything is difficult. You know, our revenue has plummeted significantly, and we are still maintaining this cost structure. So to align with the new reality, we need to bring down our cost structure so that it can match with our current level of revenue. And so because of that, we are sorry. This is a very difficult decision. What they are essentially saying is that they need to lay off some people. And what that means is unemployment. Okay. So when you hear GDP, that's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. Economic creation, that's the bottom line of GDP growth. Okay. So business activities need to grow. Business activities need to increase such that it can be met with increased demand for the factors of production. And that's where you and I are, that's where it affects you and I. Okay. So that's that about that. So cyclical, non-cyclical. When the economy is not doing well, there are some industries that would still continue to be fine relatively. Okay. So that's that. So how do you construct a peer group? And so a peer group is a group of companies where a group of companies that engage in similar business activities. So you look at the economics of these companies and the valuation of these companies. They are sort of influenced by closely related factors. Now, this may be a little bit confusing, and I'll try as much as possible to simplify this thought. Okay, recall that I said when you try to evaluate comparison, when you try to evaluate companies, I said look at what constitutes the bulk of their revenue sources as well as profit. Okay, and I did mention flour mills UACN in my illustration then. Okay, sometimes when you evaluate, and if you look at it really, I mean, if you look at all the consumer goods companies in Nigeria, let me list some for you. I know of Cadbury. Cadbury is into production of Bonvita. That's Bonvita account for 70% of their revenue. The 30% balance is distributed between confectionaries, Tom Tom, Buttermint. Then the last part is what they call cocoa intermediate. Okay, cocoa intermediate is is what when they import raw cocoa and they use it for their Bonvita, there are still some parts that seem to be a waste, but this waste are relevant for other production uses for other business, so they export that out again to other companies that may need those waste for their own production processes. So, but it's a very tiny part of the business. Now, that's Cadbury, right? Now, take a look at cocoa. I said cocoa. Sorry. Take note of Bonvita for Cadbury. Hold that. Keep it somewhere. Now, let's go to Nestle. Nestle's revenue is segmented into two areas. You have 60% food product. You have 40% beverages. The food product, that is 60% of their revenue, that's where you have Golden Mon. Many of you would know Golden Mon, even though I don't like Golden Mon. But I like tapioca, the irony. You have Maggi under food product. You have Cerelac. Those are the three core products I can remember under food, right? So when you think about Nestle and you know that 60% of these revenues come from food, then you begin to think about, and you see Golden Mon on shelves, you see Maggi. Maggi used to be a very strong player in its own sub industry because that's under seasoning. Then you look
Hi,
at their
Abdul.
beverages. Yes, please.
Sorry to cut in. So we need to go on a short break in the next 5 minutes, so you can just quickly round up this
Okay,
session.
okay, no problem. All right, let me just finish with this my next illustration. So you have beverages, you have the likes of Nescafe, you have the likes of Milo, okay? But mind you, Cadbury, 70% is Bonvita. Bonvita and Milo are considered competitive products, okay? But for Nestle, Milo is just part of 40% of his own revenue. But for Bonvita, it is 70% of his own revenue. So while theory may say, okay, there's some sort of similarity, you can put Cadbury and Nestle together as peers, you will see that in the revenue breakdown of these two companies, it may not be an exact like for like. However, when you even look at even the Golden Mon, the Nescafe, the everything, you would understand that the the economics of the production processes of those products is similar to that of Cadbury. And what do I mean by the economics? When you think about one, the raw materials of these two products, you all import them. And because you import their raw materials, you are essentially exposed to foreign exchange fluctuations. So that part alone is a similarity in terms of economics of how these two products are being created. I mean, that's one consideration that you may need to factor. Okay. So if you want to improve the list of your peer companies, what are the things you consider? You look at the proportion of revenue and operating profit derived from business activities similar to those of the subject companies. So in general, if I have a comparable company where there's a higher percentage of revenue and operating profit coming from the same segment, it can provide a meaningful comparison. So does a potential peer company face a demand environment similar to that of subject company? So if you look at the demand environment for a Nestle, is it the same with that of Cadbury or is it the same with that of Flamils? That's also one of the considerations. Okay. Do you have significant business segment that is comparable to other companies? So I use Amazon Web Services for an example now. Amazon is an e-commerce company, but they have a business segment that is called Amazon Web Services. That is a cloud computing business, which is a significant part of that Amazon whole enterprise. So Amazon Web Services under an e-commerce, a cloud computing business under an e-commerce business. AWS is often considered a peer to Microsoft Azure, to Google Cloud. Google and Microsoft, they are playing in two different areas, even though they are both considered technology companies. But these two, even if I consider them the same, they are contrast to what Amazon does. So the point or the bottom line of this particular page is, this is just one of the things to think about, one of the things that you you evaluate in your considerations. Okay, you consider these things in addition to some other considerations that you may have worked on, right? So as based on the previous notice, we'll take a break here before we move into framework for industrial analysis. So we are beginning to enter. So we are done with the introductory part of it, the theory, and also we want to go further into the framework for industrial analysis, the strategic aspect of it. When you begin to look through how to do the industrial analysis, and then the strategic part of it, right? So I think I'll just stop now.
Thank you, Abdul. So we'll take a 10 minutes break and return by 2:01. You guys, please drop your questions in the chat box. Nobody has asked any questions. Is it because Abdul is too good and we are getting it too much?
Yeah, Abdul, just to call your attention to your screen is still up. Notice that you are no more in the full screen mode. Or just not the screen is still up. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Hi everyone, our class will be commencing in another 2 minutes, so kindly join back. Hi Abdul. So the break is over. You can continue the class now. Thank you.
Could someone please confirm if I'm audible so I can continue?
Yes, you are.
Yes, please.
All right, thank you. Okay, anyway. So we'll move with the framework. So when you want to start your industrial analysis, okay, there are two things to factor. There are external considerations and internal considerations. The external considerations are outside the rectangle, and the internal considerations are in the rectangle. So what are the external considerations? You have demographic influences, you have macroeconomic influences. Oh no, this should be governmental influences, not threat of new entrants. That's a mistake. You have environmental influences, you have social influences, and you have technological influences. Internally, that is factors that are internal to the industry. You have threat of, this is basically Porter's five forces anyways. You have threat of new entrants, bargaining power of customers, bargaining power of suppliers, threat of substitute. Then within the company, you have stuff like rivalry, you have life cycle analysis, and then you have business cycle sensitivity. We'll touch on this extensively in subsequent slides, right? Now, the strategic perspective. When you analyze an industry, you must recognize that economic fundamentals vary. Some industries are very competitive, with everybody struggling to make money, while some industries have attractive characteristics that allows everybody to make money, regardless of how small or big you are. Currently, in Nigeria today, the manufacturing sector is currently struggling to breathe, while even everybody is struggling to breathe, but it pass each other or it pass one another. In the financial services sector, they are making a lot of money. I mean, a lot of them made record profit, record revenue. That is because of their own industry characteristics. So you need to note that. So sometimes you need to be very, very sure before you make comparisons. Now, different competitive environments are often tied to structural attributes. And that is why when you make company analysis, you need to note that structural attribute before you delve into it. And I like to personalize this, and I'll give this example. Some of us may work in industry A, and then you begin to wonder that I have friends in industry B or that in company B. We are both in entry level, but one is making, let's say, 200,000 naira at entry level, and another person is making 400,000 naira at entry level. And then you begin to wonder, oh wow. Before you start with the comparison, or before you start with the evaluation, you need to pay attention to the industry. This one that is paying 200, which industry is it in? This is the industry. What are the characteristics of this industry? What is the growth potential? Why is it so? Who are the biggest players in this industry? What is the similarity in entry level pay versus that one getting 400? Okay, so unless you do that evaluation to say, okay, this is fair, because truly that 200 may be very, very fair within the context of the industry where you play. Don't forget, I said earlier that you cannot outgrow your industry. So the one taking 400, what's the industry? What are the structural attributes that makes it possible for that kind of money to be made? It's the same thing too with companies. So if I want to allocate my capital, what are the structural attributes that make this industry attractive and not that one, such that that's why some industry their ROE 30%, 40%, and in some industry their ROE is less than 10%. And I'll give you one real example within the financial services sector. And this is my own opinion, and this is what I have researched about in the past. Let me make use of three industries under the financial services sector. You have the asset management, you have the pension fund industry, and you have the insurance industry. Let me add one more: banks, commercial banking. The average ROE in the pension fund industry should be between around 25-30%, 25-30%, depending on the biggest guy. Let me work with 30%. The asset management industry, the ROE is around 25-27. Return on equity, that is, if I invest X amount, the average profit I'll be making on that equity every year is 25%. For the insurance sector, the average ROE is about 10-12% thereabout. While for the banking sector, the average is 20%. They are all financial services. What is the business of banking? Commercial banks, they take deposit, they lend those deposits out to corporate individuals, and they invest in investment securities like treasury bills, FGM bonds, and the likes. Asset management, what do? They'll tell people to bring their money, let them invest on behalf of these investors, because not everybody has the skills to make successful investment. Investing comes with a skill, especially if you want to really, really be successful. So what they do is, you, Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C, they all bring their own revenue. So if they want to make more money, they need to create a value to their investors, the people that contributed to that pool of fund. And the only way to create value to those people, by generating good returns for them. So as you generate good returns for them, the people that put money in that fund would consider you valuable. They will market it to other people. Other people will put more money, and then the 2% is no longer on 1 billion, it is now on 2 billion, and that's how you grow. So it is a win-win for everybody. In the pension fund, is the same too. Now, what makes pension fund more profitable than the others? Very simple. You have something like regulation. In the pension fund industry, every employer, according to the pension laws, every employer is mandated to remit pensions to a pension fund administrator. So what that tells you is that every month, a pension fund will be collecting inflows based on law. Some people don't comply with the pension laws, right? But in the corporate world, because when you have to apply for contract, or when you have to be eligible for some certain things, you need to show your pension certificate that you are pension compliant. So people are incentivized to remit to pension. Not everybody does, anyways. But what I'm trying to say, for the pension guys, they get in those consistent inflows every month. Low marketing cost, because they are backed by law. So competition too, not so great until recently. So all these favorable structural factors has made the regulation is not so strong. Like, they are not faced with multiple regulatory, forces like that. They are regulated by PENCOM, and PENCOM, in my view, does not really make life hard. For the asset management guys, it is a function of your marketing. Pension, they market too, but the cost of marketing is not as high as that of the asset management guys, and that's a competitive advantage alone. Because if people don't want to invest, they won't invest. They are not forced to. They are not mandated to. They only invest because they consider it important. So if you cannot communicate your value proposition enough, they won't put in money in your fund. Okay? Insurance. In fact, for the insurance guys, there's a very popular jibe that says insurance companies don't compete with any other player. If, as an insurance company, you are competing with God and Jesus Christ. Because when you tell people to insure, the social cultural factors, which is also part of what I said here, social influences. Come and insure your car. God forbid bad thing. And my car is covered with the blood of Jesus. So that's an example of social influence that can affect the growth of an industry. A credit company will tell you, come and borrow. You're like, I don't want to owe anybody. Those are social influences. Do you understand? Yeah. So you need to understand the context in which the company operates and the competitive structure. So the starting point of analyzing competitive environment with implications for corporate strategy is using the Michael Porter's five forces. Is a popular term and is been with us for years and is still relevant today. And it's simple. The starting point of industry, threat of new entrants, how easily it is for new players to come into the market. What's the bargaining power of customers? To what extent can customers influence your decision making? Bargaining power of suppliers, threat of substitute, rivalry. And you can measure this thing between high, medium, low. The beverage industry, there's one industry that is on the negative end. If I analyze them using Porter's five, that's a alcoholic industry. The brewery industry, where they manufacture alcoholic drinks. Threat of new entrants. Let me say medium. Before it used to be high, but now it's medium. Anybody can come in. Over the last 5 years, although even the alcohol, they have different grades and different segments. You have the beer segment, you have the spirit segment. The beer segment are the likes of Heineken. Even within the beer, you have premium and value. But let me just generalize them now. You have the Budweiser, you have the Heineken, you have the Guinness, you have the
Abdurrahuf, sorry
yes,
to
please.
cut you. We can no longer see your screen.
Oh, you can't see my screen?
Yes.
Oh. Okay. How about now?
Yeah, it's fine now. Thank you.
Yeah. So over the last 4 or 5 years, I was talking about threat of new entrants. Okay. To say that, and I was using I call it the brewery industry as an example, the manufacturers of alcoholic drinks. And I was trying to talk about the extent at which new entrant has come into that market over the last 4 or 5 years. We've had Origin, we've had all these small, lower brands, all these Alumo bitters and the likes. Although you could argue that that segment is still different from the Heineken segment, the Budweiser segment, the Guinness segment, the Sanzebrow segment, the 3-3 segment, the Star segment. And you could also argue that that segment is also different from the Bailey's segment, the Ciroc segment, the Johnny Walker segment, and the likes of them. And you could also argue that that segment is different from the likes of Chelsea, the likes of I don't really know much about that particular, but the Chelsea, those gin, high spirit segment. So they're all different. But threat of new entrant, if it is high, is a problem. That means threat of new entrants, a high threat of new entrant means that there are low barriers to entry, because if the barrier is low, you have more people to come in. And some of the things that can make it easy is if capital expenditure to come into that market is, if the capital expenditure, the capital required to come in is not really significant, people will come in. If it is an industry where there's not so much of differentiation, where there's no so much of branding like that, people will come in anyhow. Okay, if it is high, it's a problem for you. If the bargaining power of your customers, if the bargaining power is high, is a problem for you. It means they can influence your pricing. Okay, if they don't consider your product important enough, so to speak. If the threat of substitute is high, it's a problem for you. If the bargaining power of your suppliers is high, it's a problem for you. Now, if you have simultaneously, your threat is high, your bargaining power is high, your threat of substitute is high, then is a bigger problem for you. So it's a case of a heat map, red across board. Sometimes your bargaining power of customers may be high, but if your bargaining power of supplier is low, that's +1 -1. So it now depends on degree of power and the degree of importance. Sometimes threat of new entrants may be high, and automatically if threat of new entrant is high, that means rivalry will be high too as well in terms of competition. Okay, so you may need to evaluate this individually for you to be able to arrive at an average conclusion of how this industry is. Me, alcoholic now, threat of new entrant, I'll put it at medium. Mind you, there is no single law about it. It's subjective based on your analysis. Bargaining power of customers, I think, is high because if you look at National Bureau of Statistics and look at household consumption data, I don't know if I should do this because of time. Please remind me at the end of the class. I'll show you how to get data from National Bureau of Statistics. Go to NBS. There's a data called household consumption expenditure. It shows you what average Nigerian household, what they spend money on mostly. You will see alcoholic products last, and it's an inelastic product. It is when you don't have money that you remember that alcohol is dangerous for the kidney. But if money come now, let us ball. We take 2 or 3 more bottles. Anyway, somebody argued this with me that is a lie. That it is when there's no money with you that you spend more on alcohol to forget your worries. But that's by the way. So threat of substitute, super high. And mind you, let me make a distinction. Many people confuse these two a lot. Threat of substitute is not the same as competition. And this distinction is important for some of us that studied economics, because substitute in the context of economics, economic theory, is different from substitute in the context of business strategy and industry analysis. Now, if you remember, look at vertical and horizontal. Imagine a vertical shape, a vertical line and an horizontal line in your head. If you've imagined it, hold it one hand. Substitutes are alternative products away from that industry. And I'll give you an example. Coke, Coca-Cola, Pepsi is a substitute to alcohol. Bottled water is a substitute to alcohol. Hollandia yogurt, Chivita is a substitute to alcohol. Fearless, Predator, Monster, they are substitute to an alcoholic drink. However, Guinness is not a substitute to Heineken. Budweiser is not a substitute to Heineken. Trophy is not a substitute to Gouda. They are competition or competitors. So think it this way. If we are vertical, that's number one. I think that one is vertical. Number one, we are all in the same line. That is competition. But that horizontal, they are substitute. Okay? Think about it to say Pepsi and Coca-Cola, they are known rivals. Pepsi and Coca-Cola may be fighting for market share, but if they know that there is a Chivita or there is one energy drink that people are now going to that is affecting their demand, that is affecting the demand for their two products, both of them will talk to each other and say, you know what, I know we are not best friends, okay, but calm down. Now, only when market day we feel the fight. Right now, there is a third party, okay? And because of this third party, you know how we Nigerians do when we can talk about our economic challenges, but we don't want external people to interfere, okay? You see that Chivita, a new emerging product that is causing problem for us. Let us join hands together. Let us send that one away from this market. Let us take him out. Once he is out and we have the market to access, we can continue our war. Okay? But for Pepsi and Coca, they are not substitute, they are competition. So please take note. Rivalry, that's why I put in bracket intra-industry, that within them, yes, competition. So be careful by saying, okay, no. Heineken, alcoholic. So you have alcoholic products, you have carbonated drinks, you have energy drinks, you have soft drinks, you have even water. Okay, so something that is alternative to it. Because you can't say Guinness is an alternative to a trophy because it's still alcohol, right? Okay, so this is the starting point of it. Substitute, it will plenty for the brewery industry. Bargaining power of suppliers, raw material, if you even factor in the FX component of raw material, because if FX rises, is a problem for all of them, whether they like it or not, because they don't manufacture, they don't have, or they are not really big on vertical integration. Okay, for Dangote Cement now, bargaining power of supplier is very low for him because he is the one in charge, or he's the one in control of his raw materials. The raw materials are in Nigeria. The extraction is done in the extraction is done in places like Kogi, Lafarge too. Bargaining power supply is relatively low because Ewekoro, where the limestone is, they have a factory there. So they do the extraction, they manufacture right from the raw material to a finished good. But for a brewery, the sorghum, the barley, and all those things, they don't have control over their prices. Okay, you can have many suppliers supplying you, but the fundamental power is lost when you have control, when you don't have control over how it is being priced. You don't have control over the prices. And you also don't have control over foreign exchange. It means that if exchange rate moves sideways today, you are exposed to it, whether or not you like it. So it's relatively high for them. Okay, so everything seems high for the brewery industry, and that is why profitability took a severe hit over the last few years, that the economy has not really been great. So this is the starting point for your industry analysis. So you think about another company too, let's say a real estate company or a painting company. You will assess all of these too. Okay. Now, what are the important considerations? So, as I mentioned, what are the barriers to entry? Is it difficult or easy for a new competitor to challenge incumbent? Okay. How concentrated is the industry? Do a small number of companies control a relatively large share of market? Look at the banking industry, for instance. Look at the top 10 banks in Nigeria today. Compare the top 10 banks in Nigeria today and the top 10 banks in Nigeria 5 years ago. Or let me limit it to top 5. Top 5 today versus top 5 5 years ago versus top 5 10 years ago. If the names you see now are still the names that were there 5 or 6 years ago, then there is a strong barrier to entry in that industry. That's one way to look at it. There's a very strong barrier to entry. If the top 5 this year, the top 5 names were still the top 5 names 5 years ago or 10 years ago, then there's a strong barrier to entry. In the same banking industry, the top 5 banks account for 80% of the industry total assets. That's a concentrated industry. Just 5 names, 80%. What are capacity levels? Does the industry suffer chronic over or under capacity? Or do demand and supply tend to come into balance reasonably? So the context of this is, what sort of industry is it? And what sort of capacity levels do they operate? And the relevance of this is that in times when there is excess demand and the supply in that industry does not immediately respond, it means that players in that industry can benefit from higher prices. And when they can benefit from higher prices, it is beneficial for the financials. It is beneficial for the numbers. It is beneficial for the valuation. It means they can price very well, because it is difficult for supply in that industry to match the demand. And that is the reason why all of us cannot get rent. We cannot get good accommodation in Lagos today. There's so much demand that supply cannot immediately cover. That is why that's why 2-3 years ago, a mini flat or a self-con is about 400 or 500,000, depending on the area. Today, we are looking at ridiculous amount, really. I don't even want to talk about all those extra charges that I personally consider inappropriate. But that's, by the way, that's another story. But the point is, and that's why real estate guys, I mean, those people in residential real estate, especially in areas like Yabas, Urulere axis, they tend to benefit a lot. They tend to enjoy a lot of, industry dynamics, economic dynamics, based on the fact that, there are other things that could impact their attractiveness too. But in terms of this particular variable that we are working with, capacity levels, they tend to benefit from it. How stable are market shares? So if you look at the market share of a company today, maybe estimated at 40%. And how do you estimate market share anyways? You can estimate market share by volume. What volume of goods do they produce every year? Compare it to others. Okay, what is their capacity compared to others? Okay, but when you're looking at capacity, you also need to look at capacity utilization too, because you can have 100 million barrels, for instance, and your utilization is just 20%, that means you're only doing 20 million out of 100. Somebody else can have 50 million barrels and his capacity utilization is 50%. So that means that's 25. So the 25 versus 20, the one with 25 is the one with higher market share. Okay, even though he has lesser capacity, but that one of 20 has the potential to do more. Okay, I'm just giving you context. So you can look at it from capacity, you can look at it from actual volume shipped. In Nigeria, it is very difficult to get data. So you can use a proxy. You can use a proxy. You can use revenue as a proxy for market share. The only challenge with using revenue as a proxy is that revenue is a function of price and quantity. Sometimes I may not have that quantity, but I have pricing power. Okay, and I'll use an example for Android devices and iPhone. iPhone shipment into global shipment is not the number one. In Africa especially, transient phones have the highest shipment into Africa. Your Techno, your Infinix, your Itel, they are all under transient. They have the highest shipment, and I even think Samsung even has higher shipment into Nigeria. The iPhone very small, but iPhone commands between 70 to 80%. I'm not sure of this figure, please, but I know it's that high. 70-80%, we can confirm afterwards. 70-80% of the industry profit goes to iPhone, and that's because of pricing premium. This thing that I just mentioned, we'll talk about it, I think, in the last slide. Okay, so you could argue that who has the market share in Nigeria in terms of phones? You can call Infinix, you can call Techno, you can call this, you may be right. But in terms of value, profitability, who has the highest share, you will begin to talk about iPhone. At the end of the day, the reason why people would look at iPhone as a winner here is because it is the money that counts at the end of the day. It is the money. If you sell 2 million units at 2 naira, that's 40 million. If I sell 10 million units at 5 naira, that's 50 million. At the end of the day, 50 million is what counts. It also has its own cons, but that's by the way. So I'm trying to illustrate the disadvantages, some of the disadvantages using revenue as market share. But if it is the only means, we try as much as possible to start by understanding the volumes. But if you don't have the volumes, we work with the value, if that is the best we can get. I just thought to chip that in. Now, what is the industry in its life cycle? Sometimes you need to come in analysis. We like to work with oranges for oranges, apples for apples. Don't compare me. I am already 35. I am already at my, let me say I'm already at senior management, or let me say mid-level management. I'm close to my peak, my career peak. I have a car, I have a house. Maybe I'm married, okay, and everything is looking fine. And in the world of social media today, I post all of these things and it looks good. And you're 25. You have the potential. You've not gotten there yet. And you're beginning to look at, you are in the same private equity space, but you've forgotten that there's a 10 years gap between you and this person that you're comparing yourself with. You're not there yet. You could get there or not, but you're not there yet. So you have to be very, very careful with the way you make your comparisons. Don't compare a Zenith Bank to a bank that is starting today. Zenith Bank has been in an industry since 1990. It has survived how many economic crises? It has survived how many governments? It has survived how many regimes? It has survived how many technological changes? Okay? So even though we are in the same industry, by the way, we are in the same industry, we are selling the same thing, but I am just growing. I am just in my embryonic stage. But you're already in maybe your mature stage. Don't compare my multiples with your multiples. Because if I am attributed a 30 times multiples, and this is valuation, I expect you to learn that as well. If I'm being valued 30 times and a bigger name is being valued 15 times, it may mean that you could arrive at a conclusion. But before you get to that conclusion, take a step back to say, okay, what are the differences? Okay, you're already big, there's little you can do. Me, I'm small. I can still grow well. There's still potential to grow more. And think about potential in this way. You are in a classroom. You only have one chair, one table, and the classroom is relatively big. It means that I can add more table and chairs into that classroom. But if you enter another room where everywhere is filled up, if you had additional table and chair, you would, instead of you making life easy for people in that class, you will make life more difficult because it will become crowded. It will become inconvenient for people to study. Ventilation no longer goes across because everybody don't choke for inside class. It becomes a problem. You understand, right? So we tend to look at it from that perspective. You've grown this, and that's why big countries like United States, like UK, like Canada, like Germany, you see the economic growth rate 2%, 3%, 1%. They don't belefu. They don't, everything don't set in those economies. Waiting you won't add again. Okay? But in economies like Kenya, like Nigeria, like Poland, potential still plenty. So there's still opportunities. There are still areas where you can just invest and unlock growth. That's why it is unacceptable. It is considered unacceptable for an economy like Nigeria to be growing by 2%. Even US, where they don't believe, they are doing 4%. They are doing 3%. Here, where there are a lot of potentials, 2% is not acceptable. You have to be doing 7%, 6%, 7%, 8% for you to say, okay, yes, you're on track. That's where you can match up to the bigger guys. Okay, so your industry life cycle, very, very important. Don't just speak comparable. Don't just speak compare and say, okay, let's compare straightforward. No, no, no. You need to scrutinize. You need to ask questions. You do analysis. That's your work. How important is price to customers' purchase decision? If it is extremely important, then forget it. Recently, we heard of P&G, we heard of GSK, we heard of about others living in Nigeria. I don't know if it's okay. Please remind me of that conversation. I may need to talk a bit around that exit and P&G and how pricing is important. But for some of these brands, let me just give an insight or let me just even discuss it. So, and this is my opinion, or some people may not share similar view, but from what I understand about that industry, this is what I think. P&G, I mean, you all know their product, or some of you may know their product. They manufacture Always, they manufacture Pampers, and there was a time Always was an undisputed market leader. I mean, people would want to buy Pampers. They want to buy another brand, but they'll call it Pampers. We still call it Pampers till date, by the way. You know those companies that that's brand anyways. If you want to understand the concept of brand, that's what it means. And this is common. People want to buy Gala, and what you want to get is a sausage roll, and you're calling everything Gala. You want to buy a toothpaste, and you're calling everything Close Up. That is brand. That is brand. P&G, I think they used to, yeah, I think it was P&G. Yes, they are also the manufacturers of Oral-B. Oral-B, yeah. So Oral-B, Pampers, Always. Look at all this product, number one. Then at some point, macroeconomic factors set in. And don't forget, in one of my slides, I showed you external factors, demography, whatever, and I said macroeconomic influences. Where did the macroeconomic influence start from? In 2014, there was a structural change in the global crude oil market. One of the biggest buyers of oil became a seller. That is a double catastrophe. It is enough for you to not buy again. But if you stop buying to become one of the sellers, that's a double problem. Because if you look at it from a demand supply curve, demand don't comot market. That demand will comot market can't add to the supply wey dey. That is significantly higher supply. And that was what, and one of the biggest buyers that I refer to is the United States of America. So oil prices went as high as $100 per barrel. It became extremely profitable to invest more in shale oil. Shale oil had been around for a while, but it wasn't economically viable because you needed price of final output to reach a level where it becomes profitable. I mean, everybody that comes to do business, the business has to be profitable for me to deploy my capital into. If I don't consider it profitable, I better keep my money elsewhere. Opportunity cost. So all the energy, all the sweat, all the hard work, if it's not worth it, I leave that industry. Okay, so $100 per barrel in 2014, people drilled more oil. And don't forget one of the laws of demand and supply, that the higher the price, the higher the supply. So because of the higher prices, everybody wanted to capture that growth. Everybody wanted to capture that prosperity. People started drilling more, and it created a supply glut. So shale oil was profitable, and they decided that, okay, we are no longer buying oil from the world. We can now sell our own oil. So prices collapsed. And that's one of the things you guys need to take note of, that in an industry where there's so much abnormal profit, where one industry players are making so much money that they can't grow like that till infinity. That growth will attract more players into that market, provided there is no barrier to entry. Please remember, that's that caveat. Provided there is no barrier to entry, people will come into that industry, and they will, all the profit that you are sharing, all of us must share it. It cannot be only you. It cannot be only you. So all that growth, all that market share will come down at some point, which is why when your valuation guy is telling you that your terminal value, you can't grow till infinity, this is the context. No matter how profitable you are, and no matter how an industry is disastrous, at worst case, everybody will die, or many people will die, leaving one or two players in that market. Now, if everybody has died and one or two people are there, it remains only them, and they can begin to capture all of the profit that are available in that industry, provided that some other factors have not resulted into a total decline in that industry. An example is BlackBerry. There was a time, an example is fax machine. Technology can make your industry move from early stage to declining stage almost immediately. BlackBerry used to be the la creme, used to be the iPhone of those days. And then technological advancement came, Androids came, they gave us more options, they gave us more innovation, and then they died. They couldn't innovate quickly, and then they died. Okay, right? So at that point, when crude oil price collapsed, it became a problem for Nigeria because of two major reasons. Reason number one, oil inflows meant lower oil revenues for Nigeria. And at that time, oil revenue used to be one of the major contributors of government revenue. That's problem one. So because government revenue took a hit, they could not pay salaries. And if you could not pay salaries, what does it mean? Aggregate demand took a hit in one way or the other. Government could not invest in infrastructure. Government could not invest in other areas. If you do not invest in infrastructure, you have created a problem for companies operating in your economy. Because if people cannot move their truck from the port to their warehouse seamlessly, that's a cost pressure, and that cost will filter in your prices. If the government cannot pay salaries to their civil servants, those people cannot demand. And that's a problem for companies for their own revenue, because demand will come down. And the second biggest factor is foreign exchange earnings. Oil used to account for maybe 70-80% of, today is about 60%, 70-80% of government foreign exchange earnings. And why is foreign exchange a big deal for us in Nigeria? In two ways. Way number one, before your local companies can produce, they need to import raw materials. And if they cannot import raw materials, it means that they cannot produce. If they cannot produce, it means that there will be a supply gap in that market. If there is a supply gap, there's no way you can escape higher prices. Prices would have to go up. Or I am a company. I used to source exchange rate at 400. Now it is now 800. It has become costlier. It means that I will have to shell more naira to get the same unit of dollar. It will have to filter in my prices in one way or the other. So from import. Okay. Now that was the biggest issue. And the second part is that you need foreign exchange for investment. But let me just stick to the first two. So companies could not import, companies could not produce. And don't forget what I told you using my Cobb Douglas discussion, that labor and capital. Because companies could not produce, it made no sense to retain their employees. I have 10,000 factory workers. I used to do 10,000 kilograms. It's just an illustration. So that's 1 for 1. Now I'm doing 5,000 kilograms because I cannot get the dollars to import raw materials to do the remaining 5,000. So I have 5,000 kilograms and I have 10,000 workers. What do? I tell 5,000 people to go home. At least give me breathing space. I cannot pay you. I cannot be producing and be collecting money from 5,000 kilograms and be paying salaries of 10,000 people. That's a mismatch. It means I'll be unprofitable. It means my margins will shrink. It means that I'll be making losses. And don't forget, I'm into business because I want to make profit. I can take it for a while, but if it is persistent, I have to make a decision at some point. So what seemed to be a temporary problem became a long-lasting problem. If you look at the economic data, you look at GDP growth over the last 10 years, I think we've not done 3.5% since 2014 till date. I don't think we've done 3.5%, and that's abysmal by all standards. Okay, we are improving anyways, but that's not the growth that you want to really place. And it is even much worse when you break it down to see where the growth is coming from. You realize that everything comes from the information and communication space. If you take that out of the economy, you may be talking about a decline, so to speak. And to be fair, we also had, COVID that happened and some other factors too. But that's by the way. So these companies, don't forget they work with brands. And the branding came from quality products. And for you to make quality product, you need to make sure that all the raw inputs that you have used, they have to be intact. If I don't get the dollars to import the raw input, it means that I cannot guarantee quality of that product. And you have two options as a business manager. It's either you compromise that quality, you ration, you ration, or you rationalize the raw input. You do raw material rationing. You either do that or you decide not to do it at all. If you ration your input, it will affect the quality. If you affect the quality, it will affect your brand. And if you affect your brand, it will affect one of your competitive advantage. So you will now begin to say, okay, yeah, it's either I do this, it's either I make this compromise or I don't make this compromise, or I leave the market if I don't consider it's profitable for me anymore. I suppose, I'm not saying that it is, but I suppose that it is one of the things that filtered into the decision making of these people. GSK suffered big time to import the necessary raw materials to produce. And since they couldn't produce and the numbers weren't just making sense, you just had to make a call. This is a capital allocation decision. And as analysts or as boarding analysts, these are some of the things investors really consider. I have 1 million. 1 million has opportunity cost. Why should I put money here and not here? What makes me want to invest in you and not in another person? Okay, everything is about competitive advantage, right? You finish school, you finish with a first class, you finish with a 2-1. There are chances that many more people also finish with the same thing. First class in Unilag, okay, there's somebody with another first class in the UI, there's another person with a first class in Bowen, there's another person with first class in Covenant, 2-1. But okay, after that, what is your own competitive advantage? What gives you? Why should anybody trust you? Why should anybody put money in you? You want to write a CFA, you want to write this, you need someone to invest in you. Why? What is it? What is in it for them? Why should I invest? What's your output? What value creation? Okay, if you invest in me, this is what I'm able to learn, this is what I'm able to acquire, this is the skill I'm able to put together. And by the time I combine all of this is the kind of value I'll be adding to corporate, and this is the kind of money I'll be making. And if it is strictly from, people that sponsor education are parents mostly, and they may not need your return, so to speak, because they will consider it their responsibility. But think about it from somebody investing in you, an independent source, and you want to market yourself. Why should a Harvard University, why should they grant you scholarship to come and do business, to come and do what? Then you begin to communicate what you've done and what you're likely going to do if you get this thing, your competitive advantage. That's the sense. So, for those brands, they needed.
Before you move on, so there are 2 questions here for you. Maybe you'd like to address them, but you want to wait till the end.
Okay, let me quickly attend to them.
Okay, so the first question is, should Porter's 5 forces be analyzed based on the global and local industry, or just the local industry in which the company operates? Then the second question, concerning the foreign exchange, can't the local manufacturer source for materials in Nigeria?
Okay, very brilliant question. So first one, the context of Porter's 5 forces, all the industries that they are exposed to. Now, if I have a business, Nestle Nigeria has market in Nigeria, 90% of its revenue, in fact, nearly 100% of its revenue generated in Nigeria. So therefore, the context of Porter's Five Forces will be in the Nigerian market. Dangote Cement, they generate as much as 1.2 trillion naira in revenues. 60 or 70% of it is from Nigeria. 30% is in other market, Pan-African market. So it's quite significant. So if I want to do Porter's Five Forces, I will have to consider Nigeria in Nigerian market and in Pan-African market. But don't forget it is a 70-30 thing. Okay, because it is 70-30. If I have data to do for other African market, it is good because you're growing granularly, because you are also understanding the market well. Okay, but if there is no data or there are no information, since 70% is majority, okay, so I can, it's subjective, but it's often better to stretch deeper. It is one of those advantages you will have. Somebody who did the granular work versus somebody who just work with 70%. You may arrive at the same number, but different conviction levels. But yeah, to answer your questions, first understand the industries or the market where the company is operating, then you do your Porter's Five Forces in that regard. Now, the second question is, can't local manufacturers, can't they, can't companies source their raw materials locally? Very brilliant question. So this is the thing. Nigerian breweries, someday when they spoke about their exposure to raw FX, and a question was thrown to their CEO, why can't you do vertical integration? Why can't you source your barley locally? Why can't you get your sorghum locally? Why can't you create a business where you source all your raw materials locally? And I'll give you an example of why that may be important. There are two companies in Nigeria that are really, really doing relatively well. Dangote Cement and a group of company called Tolerance. They have, this story has been used as case studies in many instances that if you want to survive in Nigerian very harsh operating environment, if you want to make money, you have to make money. You have to make sure that you are invested across the entire value chain of your product, from raw material to final product. Look at Dangote Industries, cement, for instance. The raw material, this extraction is in Nigeria. They have a factory where they extract it. Okay, they have a license, a mining license, where the government would issue you, like just like the way they give oil companies oil mining license, a license to extract this raw material. They will pay their royalties to government, by the way. They will extract it. They will take that extract and those limestones, they will take it to their factory. They will process it. They will now process it. They have their own trucks. They have a trucking company in partnership with Sino Truck, right? So they are also in charge of that. So what am I saying? They are in charge of sourcing. They are also in charge of manufacturing or processing. They're also in charge of distribution. So they are in control of the entire value chain. They don't have issues with FX. So in fact, they earn FX. The only issue with FX that they may have is export market and converting to Naira. Translation impact. But in terms of earnings, they are long. Okay, but tolerance to the same thing, and it seems to be the way to go in Nigeria. You must have even in our personal lives. If you want to have control of yourself in Nigeria today, you must have your own apartment. You probably need to have your own car. You don't rely on Uber, on public transport. You probably need to even generate your own power. Maybe you get solar or you buy generator, such that you don't rely on NEPA. You have full control of your life. No NEPA is giving you productivity issues also. Some people have argued that that's the way to survive. And it sounds very good, right? But all of these things that I've mentioned, they no be beans. You require significant, please take note, you require significant capital to put all those things in place. And getting that capital, not everybody can get that capital to put all of these things in. And put in mind that I only want to manufacture beer. I don't want to go through the stress of farming. Because the moment you're beginning to talk about getting sorghum or barley in Nigeria, you're talking about farming. You either farm yourself or you rely on people that are farming. And those that are farming, you need to make a lot of investment in them. Education, yielding. You need to begin to talk about yield. You need to begin to, because agriculture is not a small business. It's not a go to farm and grow. If you want to make it something that will be scalable, you require sophisticated means and methods. All of this which will take your time and resources. Even if you have time and resources, you may not have the capacity. You may not have the capacity. And what this me when I was in GS3 and I wanted to go to SS1, and they said, okay, I mean, in my junior secondary school days, I used to say that those were the days when I was hot, literally. I looked at it. So in GS3, some of you might have experienced this too. They will tell you to do pre-SS1, where you will be asked to do all science courses, all art courses, all commercial courses, and then you know which one to go with. And some of you will say, or some of our parents will say, science is where to go because that's where the smart people are. Clinical is where to go because that's where the smart people are. In my own case, so when I saw it and I started with geography, I started with longitude and latitude, I just knew that no, I'm not gonna survive here. The worst of the worst when they started with chemistry. Oh my god, when they started with chemistry, I said, "Wait till this chemistry," and I knew my capacity. So yeah, I may be considered smart, but with what I was seeing, I just knew it wasn't meant for me. And then I started to do literature. I started to read about Macbeth, read about William Shakespeare. I started to do government, started to do economics, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. Okay, so even if you had the resources, even if you had the money to buy all the textbooks in the world, you had all the resources in the world, you may not have the capacity. You just don't have the capacity to thrive in this area. Okay, that is why some Goldman Sachs, if you guys heard about the story, Goldman Sachs is a big bank. Goldman Sachs is known for all these big deals, big investment banking deals and all. And then lately, there's been rising popularity of fintechs, rising popularity of digital banking. And then Goldman Sachs decided to also, fear of missing out. You don't want to miss out in this momentum. So they also decided to delve into digital banking space. They lost $1.5 billion and they left. They closed down that business because they just didn't have the capacity to execute. Sometimes you have the plans all great in your head, but you simply just don't have the capacity. So to answer your question, it comes as an extra cost for them, some of which they don't consider as value adding. Okay, because it's not just the money. You need to monitor, you need to look through this. That means another regulator for you once you begin to delve into that space. So you're dealing with an extra layer of regulation, you're dealing with another layer of stakeholders, because when you talk about farming, you talk about community management, you talk about this and that and all of that. Not every company wants to do that. Okay, not everybody wants to do that. So that may be one of the reasons why some of these companies are not considering it. Okay, and because they didn't do it before, it means they have to start from the scratch. But I know some companies are doing it. Dangote Sugar, for instance, vertical integration is great. I know of Friesland, Campina, Wamco. There's manufacturers of picnic and tree ceramic. I know they're also doing some work in that regard. Flour mills too. I know they are doing some kind of work. And in some cases, Nigeria does not just even have that industry, or that industry is totally dead. For healthcare companies now, 90% of their raw materials are imported, active pharmaceutical ingredient. We call it API. The pharmaceuticals industry in Nigeria is nowhere to be found, right? So starting from the scratch, you don't even have the regulation that support it. You don't even have, so they just don't bother, all right? Some industry will need to be unlocked if the policies are right. And if those policies are not there, nobody wants to delve into that space. Don't forget, every investment I make, I must have a clear case that this will bring in money for me. So I suppose that should answer that question. Yeah. So I can proceed now, right?
Abdurrahman, but we should be rounding up the class.
Oh, okay. So what are the barriers? So if the industry has high barriers, okay, we've spoken about this. Okay. And one last look at the last one here. Do not confuse barriers to entry with barriers to success. Sometimes you can enter that industry easily, but it doesn't mean that you have enough to challenge the people that are existing. And I've given an example here: aircraft manufacturing and oil refinery. So industry concentration, I've emphasized on that previously. So what are the other considerations? Industry capacity, market share, price competition. I think I've also emphasized on that. So industry life cycle. All right. In your analysis too, you need to factor in life cycle. And when a company is in embryonic stage, when a company is in a shakeout and mature stage, I've included some characteristics that you may need to factor. So for company in embryonic stage, slow growth, high prices. And the prices will be high because they are just starting. Consumers don't know about the product yet, and volumes are not sufficient to achieve meaningful scale. So you have those high prices. As they begin to achieve scale, okay, so what the meaning of scale is that I have a factory and I'm only I've spent so much money, and the factory depreciation cost is 1 million every year, or let me say 10 million every year, and I've not sold enough to be generating 10 million. Okay, that means I'll be incurring losses. But as time passes by, the moment I begin to sell 10 million worth of goods, it means that I've broken even. Okay, so I cannot charge low prices between 0 to 10. So the moment I begin to achieve 15 million, 20 million, 25 million, and my cost is fixed at 10, so I can afford to bring down my prices now, because it won't hurt my margins because I'm still even profitable, right? So growth and the relevance of this ideally is when you want to analyze your industry and you're seeing that why is it not performing in the same way that this particular company is performing. You need to take note of this. Is this company already mature? Is this company already in growth? Don't compare me with a company that cannot grow more than 4% again when I still have all the room to grow by 20% every year. Don't say I'm overvalued because my multiple is higher than a company that is growing by 4%. If a Dangote cement can be growing at 10% and is trading at this multiple, then you shouldn't trade above that. It is erroneous judgment. Okay? Dangote cement may be big, but it may not have the kind of growth that I have, right? It may not have the kind of potential that I might have. That's just one way. You may consider other factors too that may make you lesser than Dangote, but for that particular idea of I'm growing faster than you or revenue growth, it may not be sufficient. That's the point. Okay. So in a growth stage, right? And what should management do when a company is in a growth stage? So typically, management, they focus on focus on marketing to introduce new consumers. They focus on building scale, and they focus on reinvesting heavily. So you can have a company that is starting from the scratch and their cash flows are negative because they are investing heavily. So in a mature stage company, what do? They don't bother to launch new product because they're already mature. Nobody accepts it anymore. What they do is cost optimization. What they do is they start to pay dividends. Okay, so when you do your discounted dividend model too, and you realize that this person's dividend payout is 70%, another person's dividend payout is 30%, don't unnecessarily say or don't conclude that the one paying 30% is less valuable. No, that may not be the case. Okay, yeah, so it's something to consider. So what are the macroeconomic influences? The GDP, interest rate, availability of credit, and inflation. Inflation affects companies from their revenue because when consumer disposable income is low, it means that they cannot demand as much as they used to. When inflation is high, it also means that the operating cost of a company is high. So that's double catastrophe again. Lower revenue, higher operating cost, lower profit. It will affect your valuation because it means lower cash flows. Availability of credit. If you are faced with high revenue and low revenue growth and higher operating cost, such that your cash flow has taken a hit. If credit is not available for you to stay afloat during that period when there are economic challenges, you may pack shop, you may close down your business. Okay. Demographic influences, the rise of Gen Z's, housing demand, technology. One of the industries that I like so much that I'm putting money in is the gaming industry. Creator economy too. 17 years median age, unemployment is high. So what have we done as youth? The rise of technological advancement, the rise of smartphone penetration, the rise of digitization has created another industry that is called creator economy. What is creator economy? It is that economy where you have social media influencing. It's that economy where you have content creation. And mind you, if that industry is growing, I want to also position in companies like MTN because it means that there will be a complementary increase in data demand. To do all those things on social media, you require a lot of data. It means that those platforms itself, they become valuable. I may want to invest in companies like Twitter and companies like Netflix and all. I'm just trying to give illustration of how the changing demography sometimes affect, economic performance or the growth of an industry, right? Zoom too. We are having this conversation by Zoom rather. Okay, so That's the rise of digitization. Maybe 10 years or 5 years down, 5 years ago, we may not have been able to do this. I even heard that universities too are also adopting this approach, which is great. Okay, so environmental influences too. So this is where conversations around climate change, and this is more peculiar to people in the oil and gas space. Technological influences, that's quite straightforward, as technology changes. Don't forget I told you that technology can make an industry move. This thing that you saw here, you can be on embryonic, and you can become a decline almost immediately. It's not compulsory that it has to be 10, 15 years down the line. No, technology can make you move from 100 to 0 almost immediately. Fax machines, when email came on board, it became a 0 immediately, right? Social influences is an example, and governmental influences. Some of you heard of Gokada. Gokada came into the economy, it came into Nigeria. They did gain some traction. They leveraged on the investment thesis, people with productivity issues, transportation inefficiencies, and all. And then one policy nearly destroyed the business. It destroyed the businesses effectively. They had to pivot into something else. But those are some of the issues. There's one company called Dunlop. When in 2007 there was a policy that raised import tariffs on automobiles to 50%. That was one of the last economic policies of former President Olusegun Obasanjo. So what happened to local manufacturers of tires? You know what they did? Because of 50% import tariff, what it meant was you could not import cars, or you could not import tires rather. What they did was they went to the bank, they went to obtain a 50 million US dollar loan to expand capacity, because it meant that you could not import, you will have to buy local tires. So we need to position ourselves ahead of that prosperity. So they took $50 million loan, they built everything in anticipation of that industry demand. And what happened when former late President Yar'Adua came in? He reversed that policy from 50% to 10%. The model scattered completely. All those volume growth, all those demand growth did not materialize. And what happened? They are still in that hole since then. They've not survived till date, since 2007 till date. So those are some of the instances. You need to look at that industry, look at policies, look at regulations, and see how we affect these companies. So I try to give a case study of the airline industry. What's the life cycle stage? And this is from the global context, okay? Life cycle stage, it can be considered mature. Sensitivity to business cycle is quite sensitive. It has high fixed costs, it has high operating leverage, so it depended on volume. If the global economy is not booming, the airline industry cannot boom, because people will not travel, everybody will sit at home. Nobody's going to Santorini when they've not eaten. Regulation, highly regulated. Product differentiation, there's no product differentiation really. Nobody's loyal to any airline. The only differentiation that can happen is maybe the way services are being done on a particular airline relative to another one, maybe your waitresses and all, but some people don't really mind. Technology and cost, quite significant. Okay, so it makes it possible for them to really, really battle on pricing front. Social environmental influence is very high because of carbon emissions. You can work with a consumer goods company, Nestle. Life cycle stage, I'll consider it maybe mature, or maybe in a shakeout stage. Sensitivity to business cycle, low, relatively low, right? Children will eat golden mon, whether or not your economy is great or not. Okay. Regulation is not exactly regulated. Talk about NAFDAC and a few other regulators. Okay. Product differentiation quite high. Okay. One of the ways to stand out in that space is when your product is considered quality. There's a reason why Milo is still the go-to brand, regardless of competition in that market. We've had Milo, we've had Bonfita, we've had Ovaltine, we've had every other person, but Milo still stands out. Okay, technology and cost. Technology not so much, but recently it's becoming a big deal in the form of e-commerce, right? So e-commerce, B2B startups, social and environmental influences, yeah, quite significant too, because social diversity, ESG, usage of water, usage of carbon emissions and the likes too. So this is just like a template that you may work with. So what are the sources of competitive advantage for a company? When you're analyzing a company, you need to first of all know What makes you competitively better than the other? And even if you want to start a business, if you want to enter an industry, you want to understand what makes me. You want to get a job. You want to get a job. And I said this earlier, you're going for interview. They are going to interview many people. What makes me better than another person? What makes me better than the next person beside me? Maybe not necessarily better, but what gives me an edge? Let me put it that way. Okay. So for corporate, you either adopt a low-cost strategy or a differentiation strategy. Low-cost strategy means that me and you will deliver output of 10-10. But to deliver that output of 10, I spent 5. Another person spent 2. That person that spent 2 to deliver 10. I'm not saying spend 5, deliver 10 versus spend 2, deliver 4. No, that's not it. Spend 5, deliver 10, and spend 2, deliver 10. How did you do it? Then you begin to understand. Is it that I have low advertising cost? Tesla, they don't even market at all. It's words of mouth. They rely on Elon Musk. Okay, so some people don't spend so much in advertising. Some people is because of vertical integration. That's their own competitive advantage. When everybody is looking for dollar to source to import raw material, me, I'm not looking for any dollar. My production is non-stop because everything is here. So don't forget I told you that disadvantage. So even though you may spend a lot in capital expenditure, it will help you gather competitive advantage. I'm writing CFA, I'm writing ICANN, I'm writing ACCA. All these things don't come free. They come at a significant cost, but it will give me competitive advantage. Okay, right. So, low cost strategy. They may be pursued defensively to protect market positions or to gain market share. Okay, so you want to know that, is it that I'm gaining advantage? Is it that I can lower my prices because I have a low cost advantage? Somebody else cannot lower his prices to battle with me, because if you lower your own prices and you don't have the cost advantage, you will lose out. You will make losses. And when you make losses, you will make low returns. You may even go out of business. And if you go out of business, it leaves only me. I can change my prices back up or at will. So it could be differentiation strategy. Differentiation strategy, this is branding. This is something that makes me different from another person. Some of us sell wigs. That's why some businesses have low margins naturally. Because if I sell wig, somebody else is selling wig. There's no differentiation. The same wig I get from A is what I will get from B. Maybe differentiation can come in form of customer service. How did you treat me versus how another person treated me? Maybe, but it may be little. Look at iPhone now, a completely differentiated product, a whole ecosystem on its own. And that's why they're able to charge 2 times more than an average phone, and they're still making sales. They don't even have to make the highest sales in the industry, but they can command a pricing premium. They will introduce another brand today and people will still buy, because people love the fact that I can use my iPhone, I can connect it to my Apple Watch, or my Apple Watch, I can connect it to my Mac, I can connect it to my AirPod. If I remove AirPod for phone, it automatically connect to my Mac. I mean, these are the sort of exclusivity that makes it command a pricing premium. Okay? Yeah, so you have to be different. What makes you different from others? That's the idea. Or do I have the low cost advantage? All right. So those are the 2 major sources of competitive advantage. And so what are the checklists? I created the checklist. This is adapted from the CFA curriculum. Some of the things you need to look out for: corporate profile, governance, industry characteristics, demand pricing, supply and financial ratios. Okay. And so what do you want to do? Before you get to company analysis, by the way, you need to check the industry first, right? Industry may be great. Some companies may underperform. Industry may not be so great, but some companies may do well. But at the end of the day, you cannot outgrow your industry. If your industry is not making money, generally, it's difficult for your company to increase your salary, because even the company itself is not making money. That's it. You can't compare one industry to a private equity industry where it's limited, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of transaction flows, which is why when you want to consider your career perspective, do an industry analysis for yourself too. Okay, yeah, so that's all. I'll be taking your questions, and thank you very much for your time. I hope I did make sense in my assessment. I hope I wasn't too fast, and I hope you were able to get stuff. But yeah, these slides will be shared with you guys, I suppose. But yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, let me see if I can take some of them. I hope I didn't lose anyone along the line, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdul. Ralph, you did a great job. There are a couple of questions here for you. So someone is asking, what is the role of corporate governance? What is the role that corporate governance has had
Okay.
since the
So
business environment has become risky and problematic in industry analysis? And then
all
the
right.
second question is, what
Okay.
parameter do we apply to over the OTC stocks like the NASDAQ, where information is scarce?
Okay. Okay. So let me take the first question about corporate governance. Corporate governance is very, very important. Okay. But corporate governance is much more relevant for company analysis. Okay. So when industry, once you've evaluated the industry and then you want to look at the company, I mentioned something that an industry may be doing well, but a company may not be doing well. And one of the reasons why that can happen is corporate governance. And what do I mean? Corporate governance in this, so from the word corporate governance, it means that you're making the right decisions. You're making the value adding decisions. You are abiding by the laws. You're not cheating the system. You're not gaming the system. You are transparent to your investors. You are a merit-based organization, because the moment you don't do all of these things, it will affect the prosperity of the company. Let me start with not following the laws. If you don't follow the laws, if you don't pay your taxes, for instance, in the short term, because you're not paying your taxes, you can be profitable. Very great. But the day the hand of the law extends to you, they can seize your license. They can stop you from doing business. And look at the greater financial loss that would happen then. If you make a trade, maybe you're stealing your client's money low key. Client is giving you money, you're stealing it, you're spending their money, you're using their money anyhow. In the short run, you can be using their money to buy houses, buy cars, and all. But one day, if the chicken comes home to roost, how do they say it? They will lose trust in your services. They will withdraw all of their money from your company. Even if they cannot withdraw everything, the law will arrest you. They will seize your license. You'll stop doing business. Nobody will do business with you again for life. Now, the question you want to ask is this cost, is it commensurate with the short-term enjoyment, right? Because at the end of the day, you have a problem, you don't communicate that problem because you are worried that people will slam you, or people would turn their back against you. At the end of the day, when they find out, they will still turn their backs against you, and you will lose business. But if you communicate the problem and you admit that you're wrong, and you're making concrete effort to right the wrong, people would even trust you more, or people would most likely trust you more. So corporate governance is really a big deal. And where it starts from, there is really no quantitative analysis to do corporate governance. It is often qualitative. You check their board of directors, you look at the names on their boards, you look at their board diversity, you look at their board composition. If the company is a healthcare company, you want to be sure that everybody on their board are not just healthcare professionals. It may be great for product perspective, but what if you face a tax problem? You don't have a finance guy on your board, you run into problem, and that problem can be the end of your business. If you don't have someone that has relationship with public policy, and you have a crisis in your community, and there's nobody to guide the management on how to survive, or how to survive through that problem, it could be the end of that business, or you could struggle significantly. So corporate governance is a big deal. It's more of company analysis. Okay. And if you look here, the governance arrangement, board structure, composition, management strength and weaknesses, compensation, corporate culture. Okay. And those are some of the things around corporate governance that would help a company also thrive in an industry. All right. So yeah. What's the second question? Companies that trade in OTC. Well, I'm not sure I exactly understand that, but I get the context. So you have two kinds of companies. You have public companies and you have private companies. Public companies are companies that are listed on an exchange. They are listed on the marketplace. And the essence of being listed, when you hear stock exchange, think about it as a market. If you want to buy tomato and you know that there's a Balogo market or there's a Lawansi market that you can go and buy it, you will find a seller there. That's what stock exchanges are meant for. For you to buy a stake in a company and you enter that exchange and you buy it or you sell whatever in whatever side you are on. Some people may have invested in companies when they were bachelors, and now that they are married, they cannot afford to save as much as they used to because responsibilities have grown. So they want to sell a part of their stake. If there was no exchange or if there was no market where they could sell their investment, it could be costly for them. It means they'll be looking for who wants to buy, which can come at a cost. Sometimes if it is for emergency, you may not get it sold. You have that asset on paper, but you cannot monetize it. So those are some of the disadvantages of a private company, right? So a public company gives you that flexibility. So you have a private company or you have a public company. Right? So companies typically start as a private company and then they take it a step further to become a public. Yes, information will be scarce if it is a private company, right? So, or if you are in an exchange where there is not so much of liquidity. What I mean by liquidity is if there is not so much of transaction exchange, flows of transaction and deals, it will be difficult getting information, and that's how it is. The only way you can just go about it is maybe spend extra costs. I know that there are some private companies in Nigeria where you can get their numbers from Corporate Affairs Commission, and that is for those who choose to file. As a private company, you are not obligated to file anything, okay? And the advantage is that you're not answering anybody, you can concentrate, there's nobody distracting you, but there are disadvantages. If somebody wants to invest in you because you are private, nobody sees your number, so they will consider you risky. If you tell me that this is what I do, okay, I hear you, and where's the fact, where's the proof, how can I verify, how can I validate, okay, how am I sure that you are saying the truth? So because of that potential risks, people, if they are meant to borrow you money at 10% or 15%, they will borrow you at 30% because they consider you risky. They don't trust your numbers enough. You may be true, may not be true. So that risk, that uncertainty will be priced in form of cost of capital. It's also one of the reasons why the cost of equity of private companies are typically or generally higher than those of public companies, right? So that's that. How do you get information? Maybe third-party resources. For instance, Augusto and Co report, for instance, Euro Monitor, but all these sources, they come at a cost. So it's quite difficult, yeah. But for public companies, it's so simple. You go to the exchange, they all should file their report on the exchange. It's mandatory. If you don't see it there, go to their website. Go to their investor relations page on the website. Download their annual report. If you want to get a full information about companies, you get it from their annual report. Go to the chairman's statement. You read about the company. Go to the corporate profile. You see content about information about that company. Go as far back as 5-6 years. Continue to read the annual report to see where they were coming from and where they are right now, okay? But for private companies, the information is indeed really scarce, except for a few that choose to, which is also a corporate governance thing, by the way, which is also a company that feels there's nothing to hide, even though I'm private, I'm still publishing my numbers, like Coronation. I know Coronation publishes their numbers, even though they're a private company. FMDQ is an example of a private company that also has its numbers out there. Once you go to the investor relations, you've seen the numbers. There's nothing to hide. You can check my numbers. You can evaluate me, but they are not mandated to. They just choose to. So that's that.
Thank you for answering those questions. So the last question here, someone is asking that, can you give an example of a company that is doing well when the industry is not doing well? You also promised to show the class how to get data from the MBS. That's
Can you take the first question, please?
an example of a company that is doing well when its industry is not doing well.
Very interesting question. An example of a company doing well, even though the industry is not doing well, that is outperforming its industry. Let me think through. The manufacturing sector is not doing well, but Bua Foods is doing well. That's an example. And when I say doing well, it comes with context. Revenue growth is outperforming industry significantly. Margins of Bua Food is outperforming industry significantly. Margins. ROE, return on equity, is outperforming industry significantly. Return on invested capital is outperforming industry significantly. Yeah. BUA Foods. That's an example. And if you look at BUA Foods' price return on the exchange over the last 1 year, it's outperformed nearly everybody as well, because investors would reward you. So, in national you could, if National Bureau Statistics, put it on Google, click here, National Bureau of Statistics. So here, e-library, you can get all kinds of data here, but because we are specific on one, so what e-library, I go to e-library, you can see them. So this is data on value added tax, this is company income tax, this foreign trade in goods. Nigeria import too much, Nigeria export too much, other argument, data will show us. Nigeria flood impact, selected food prices watch. Okay, this is for GDP. So these are most recent reports. Okay, over time. Transport fare watch, you look at the transport fare over time. You can also estimate pre-subsidy, post-subsidy, which state are hit the most. Okay, it gives you a sense, but that's not where we're going to. So anyway, so I just go to search, I just go to consumption X. So it gets, so it's an old data, so it was uploaded in 2020. This is the most recent data, so it's as at 2019. So what it tells you that this could have changed materially, right? So I click on it. You either have the report or the table. Me, I like to work with the table because I'm an analyst, right? So I like to work with the table. I like to scrutinize numbers myself, as opposed to working with reports, because that's the difference between you and a journalist. A journalist will report something. Well, everybody will report it. But as an analyst, you open the folder, you open the document, you break it down, you do your own analysis, you give your own insight. Here we go. So this is it. So there are different sheets here. So you have the food categories, non-food categories, by state, by regions too. Okay, because sometimes you can see the general figure, but it may not, the reality for some states may be better than some other states too. So when you look at poverty numbers too, you say if the poverty is concentrated in certain regions, you want to see what they are spending their money on in those regions. That is how companies make decisions to invest. Even though there's poverty there, this is the income level, but this is what they still spend most on. We need to provide our services to them. So let me go with food categories. Let's start with food categories. Okay. This is just classifications. So when they say oil and fat, this is what they mean. Okay, so let me go to Nigeria. So this is it. Household consumption. They spend 56% on food consumption, and they spend 43% on non-food, right? Now, out of the 56% that is food, the food consumed outside of home account for 11. So if I sum all these things, if I classify them under food, everything here is food, so to speak. No, except, so you see food, you see starchy root, you see rice. Rice is 5%. 5% of what you consume. This is share in total. Why this is share in food? I'm working with share in total. 11% food consumed outside of home, 6% starchy root, 5% rice, 4% vegetable. You have grains and flour. You see, this is where flour mills, the likes of flour mills will benefit here. You have pulses, you have meat, you have fruit, you have poultry, you have maize, you have non-alcoholic drinks, all this non-carbonated drink, Coca-Cola and all. 1% is spent. So if you aggregate everything, this is just food. If you sum everything up, this is number 1, 11. Number 2 is transport. So when they say fuel subsidy, impact of fuel subsidy and all, this is what also. So after food, the number 2 is 6.4 here, which is transport. The number 3 is starchy root, which is 6.28. The number 4 is health. This is why HMO business is a big deal. This is why all these pharmaceutical, all these drugs that people are complaining about, this is why it is a big deal. You see education, 6%, which is why education is a big money move. Services, including telecoms, 6%, 5.5. Rent, 5.2. Fuel and light, 5. Like that. So look at alcoholic drinks, 0.37. total, and it is the least. Anything lower than 0.37 here, no. Anything lower than 0.37 here, no. So you can say it's the least. If I arrange them in descending order from highest to lowest, I call this will be the last. So it means households don't typically give a damn about this. Yeah. So that's that. You could download the report yourself on NBS. Okay. So if you want to see GDP data too, you could download it from NBS as well. All you just need to do is come back. The most recent numbers are here. Let me quickly check this one to say gross domestic product. No, this is expenditure and income approach. There are different ways of classifying GDP. The C plus I plus G plus X minus M. This is what this is talking about. That is one of the classifications of GDP. There's the common classification is by sector. This is it. The Q3 report that was released on the 24th of November. So another way, let me see if I can get the table. We have real GDP, we have nominal GDP. Unfortunately, there's no time to go into that. Okay, so you can see agriculture, industry, services, 52% agriculture. This is at constant basic prices. Anytime you see constant basic prices, that is real GDP. Anytime you see current, okay, they didn't show it here, but let me show it here. So if you see GDP, gross domestic product, look at this formula bar, at current basic prices, this is nominal GDP. The difference between nominal GDP and real GDP is price and volume. Real GDP only considers volume movement over time, while nominal GDP considers price and volume. I'm not sure I explained that well because of time. We may have a different conversation around this later. You could reach out to me personally on this. But you will see there are 46 sectors. Yeah, some they broke it down. For instance, transportation, you have breakdown. Information, you have breakdown. Look at manufacturing here. You see oil refining, refactoring, you have cement, you have food, beverage, you have textile, you have wood, you have chemical and pharmaceutical products, you have electrical, you have basic metal, other manufacturing, right? Yeah. So you look at the growth rate, you compare, and you do your stuff. Yeah. So I think that's that. So any other question?
Thank you, Abra. So the last question here is, how do we know if a sector is underperforming?
So how to know if a sector is underperforming is by assessing the industry, the numbers, the growth numbers of that sector relative to the economy. So what is manufacturing sector growth? Okay, what is it relative to overall economic growth? So I think that's that.
Thank you, Abrao, for the brilliant session and for answering all the questions. Yeah, they're asking for the slides. I guess you share that with the society so they can get the slides. So I think I'll hand over to Samson to just round up.
Thank you, Monserrat. Just confirming that you can hear me clearly. Can you confirm you're able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And I mean, thanks a lot, Abdurrahman. I think that was like quite insightful. So I think what we will do to help the student put a lot of this in maybe further context, we'll try to see if we are able to organize an additional section in an hour that really just focus more on analysis, putting the numbers into context, probably using an industry as an example. Well, we'll try to see if April will be available. If not, we'll, try to see how we can work with him to get someone that can talk to the students, essentially just doing more of the analysis around just picking a company, for instance, and walking you through how you conduct, how you assess those metrics that are over, as mentioned, how do you contextualize the performance of the company vis-a-vis the industry it operates in? What metrics can you use? If you get these numbers together, how do you interpret those numbers? Again, just bearing in mind that a lot of students aren't economists, or they're not studying economics, or maybe they're not business oriented, and they are just really picking things up by themselves. So maybe such session will be helpful to them to properly interpret the content that has been taught today. And again, maybe also just doing a bit more, introducing them to macro data and how they can, put all these things into proper context when they are doing their analysis. Now we'll work on that and see if we can get an additional class. If not, as Abdul had mentioned, you can always send your question in, and we will be more than happy to respond to you. But Abdul, really to extend our heartfelt appreciation to your effort this evening. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, we'll send that to you and your response. Again, thank you so much, Andrew. Appreciate it. Thank you. Mosra, thanks a lot. Please, you can wrap up. Thanks a lot.
Thank you everyone for joining today's class, and we hope that you've learned a lot. So during the course of the week, go over what has been taught, watch the videos, look through the slides, and see you next week.
Oh, sorry. So there's another class again tonight, this evening rather, I think by 4. There's another class by 4, which is, I think, business analysis or financial analysis, pardon me. But yeah, thanks a lot, Mosra. Thanks everyone.